Okay, well, yeah, thank you for joining us today. I'm Claire. I'm one of the education program managers at Codebase, and I work specifically on our tech scalar courses. I am joined by Amy Wallace, who is going to be presenting today. So I will hand over to her very shortly. And also behind the scenes, my colleague Molly is going to be helping out with the facilitation. So before I pass over to Amy, we have designed this session to be a bit of a taster for our first week of our Next Steps program. So you're going to get a very brief sales pitch from me on what that is before I hand over to Amy. So just very quickly, I wanted to mention what Start of Next Steps is. So it's a practical course designed for founders and senior team members whose tech product is already in market and growth is a key factor. So big important date is our applications for this course close next Monday. What this means is that you need to have applied to be a Tech Scalar member by Monday. The course is going to run on Tuesdays from September 12th through to the 28th of November. And just the key bit of information for taking part, for you to be at the right stage of your business, you need to have a software product in market with some active customers, whether or not they are paid customers. And that QR code there will take you to be able to apply for membership. And just before I hand over to Amy, I just thought I would let you have a little nosy at this slide to get an idea of the curriculum covered in the course. Amy will be hosting our week 1 session. So that growth mindset and leadership coach is in fact Amy, which is what you're going to be getting a little sample of today. So just to pass over to Amy now, she's a leadership coach. And as you might have gathered from the title of this event, she spent 8 years working at Slack through a period of immense growth. So with that, I will try and seamlessly cancel my slides so that Amy can get hers up.
And I will try and seamlessly do the same. Are we looking good?
Wonderful, yes. Thank you.
All right, hello everyone. I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you, Claire, for the warm intro. As Claire mentioned, I am now a full-time coach, facilitator, and consultant, and I work with founders, leaders, and leadership teams at startups and scale-ups on how they can build grounded, aligned, resilient teams and understand what great leadership looks like for their organizations. More importantly, before that, I worked at Slack. And so I'll be sharing some of what I learned with you all today. And I have an agenda slide to give you a quick overview of the next half hour or so. I'll share some of the journeys and lessons that I have learned from my experience at Slack. And that going through that really rapid change, experience of growth, changing roles, trying to learn how to be a manager, things like that. And then give you a sneak peek into the topics that we'll dig into during that first Next Step session. And then we'll spend a little bit of time doing a short reflection exercise to give you a taste of that work we'll be doing in the session. And then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So to dive into my journey at Slack, I joined Slack in 2014 as a member of the customer experience team to do support over email and Twitter. There were fewer than 50 people or so when I joined the company, and I was one of 2 people who were working across Europe and Asia Pacific. I then moved into our developer support team because I was really enjoying the challenge of supporting developers who were writing in with questions about the integrations they were building on our APIs. Our platform at that time was significantly less robust than it is today. And then from there, we launched the app directory in 2015, and we needed somebody to review the apps that were being submitted from developers and subsequently manage the team that would lead the operations and editorial elements of the app directory, which is what I did until I left last year. So by the time I left, we'd gone through an IPO, grown to just under 3,000 people at Slack itself, been acquired by Salesforce and joined their 70,000 person org. So there was a huge amount of change in those 8 years, and I learned a lot about myself and my capabilities through that experience. So one thing I learned was that everything changes all the time very quickly. As I said, we felt very small at the time. When we were 50, everyone felt like they knew each other. Slack itself as a product didn't even have emoji reactions yet, or threads, or many of the things that it has today. And that very small group feeling didn't last very long. By the time I joined, there were people who were joining the next day, the next week, the month after. And within 3 months of joining the support team, it had doubled in size, and the company itself had doubled and would go on to double many times again. In fact, there would be all hands every so often where Stuart Butterfield would stand up and ask everyone who joined in the last 6 months to raise their hand. And you would frequently get more than half of the room raising their hands. And that meant that at any one time, we were dealing with an almost entirely new group of people who were joining and learning and helping the company grow. There were times when that rate of growth of hiring was too rapid and we had to slow that, but that didn't stop the amount of change and growth that happened within the work that was being done. So again, from day one, I just learned that everything changes all the time and it happens very quickly. And so throughout my tenure at Slack, it felt like I had a new job pretty much every 3 months. And that was exhilarating in some ways and exhausting in others. Even when my job didn't technically change, I was still writing support emails as an agent or still managing a growing team when I was running the app directory. The product was changing so rapidly, or the complexity of the projects were changing so much that I was taking on things that I didn't think I would ever be able to do 3 months ago. And on top of that, I didn't quite like the discomfort of not knowing all these things that I needed to know to do a better job. So I was trying to stretch myself as much as possible to lean into those things that felt scary and hard and focus on learning those new things. And one thing that helped, for example, was that if you were the only person in your time zone to do work, you just had to pick up a question from a customer. If you didn't know the answer, figure it out. If a developer's call to our API was throwing an error, figure out how to read Slack's logs and understand the API calls. Or if we were hiring a month after I joined and I needed to help with interviews, better learn how to do a half-decent interview. And there were many times that projects would come along throughout my time at Slack, and I would just think, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know how I'm going to tackle it. I don't know where to start. It feels entirely beyond me. And then the next week or the week after that, another project would come along that would just knock the first project completely off the pedestal of large and intimidating projects. And that first one would become a minor inconvenience to figure out when compared to the second one that had come along. And so it frequently felt like I was a hermit crab outgrowing that shell and trying to figure out what that next level of complexity, that next thing I needed to learn to be able to manage that, to find that next shell. And I just found myself constantly on the edge of my comfort zone. And that change and that discomfort didn't just happen in the work that I was doing. The systems and processes that we were working with needed to change every few months because things would just break. If you add more people or more complexity or a changing product, things just break. And because the whole company was growing and changing, it also meant that the people I was working with changed all the time. So I had to get really good at building relationships with people who worked in an entirely different time zone to me, people who I had not even met over Zoom, let alone in person. And I learned to learn about how you build relationships and trust. And to get good at my job, I needed to understand that as soon as someone would join, I would have to reach out, set up time for a coffee over Zoom, understand what it was that they were hoping to get from their work, how my team and I could help, trying as much as possible to be a human, much like I might have done in an office. But because I didn't have that in-person experience to lean on, because I was working far away from most of my team, it meant being really mindful about building those relationships and doing that well. And so when I was given this job of creating the team that run the app directory, I felt more than ever like I didn't know what I was doing. I'd never managed anyone before. The people who were joining my team were or had been my peers. They had been working with me, helping to manage a growing volume of app submissions. And suddenly I was their manager and had to do a good job. And I did what I tend to do in situations like this, which was do a lot of reading. I tried to read as many books as I could, scoured the internet for information, and found that a lot of the research said that people don't necessarily leave jobs, they leave their bosses. Not always, of course, but managers and leaders at organizations have a huge impact on the experience of people working in that organization. And I absolutely did not want to be the reason that anyone left. I wanted to create an environment in which people could thrive, in which people could do work that was, as much as possible within the work that we needed to be done, fulfilling for them and that would stretch them. And I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to give good feedback or have difficult conversations or ask people to do things that made me myself feel anxious. For example, very early on when I became a manager, I was doing work that I should probably no longer have been doing. Once our team had grown to 3 people, I had other responsibilities that I needed to do to help us as a team. But there were pieces of that individual contributor work that I was hanging on to, in part because there was a lot of work that needed to be done. And I knew how to do that work. That was the work that I knew how to do. I didn't know how to be a great manager. And the work of a manager is so different that I just kept thinking, oh, I don't think I'm contributing anything to this team. I need to do something. So what I had to do was look at myself and my expectations there and why I was doing that work and wean myself off doing the work itself so that I could understand where the team was going, what the problems were, what systems needed to be improved or built entirely from scratch. My job became to support the team as it scaled, to be able to take on larger volumes of more complex work, no matter how uncomfortable it made me feel to spend time doing that work. And another reason that I kept hold of some of that work was that it made me feel a little anxious to do it sometimes. I had a few pieces of things that just made me feel anxious, and I didn't want anyone on my team to feel anxious about anything. But that just meant that the work wouldn't get done as efficiently or as effectively as it could. And the times that I would delegate, someone else would pick up that work, they would unsurprisingly get it done far more effectively and efficiently, and often with less anxiety than I would have done. They were all very, very good at their jobs. And so I learned very early on that I had to be careful about the assumptions that I was making about my feelings towards work and how, if at all, those feelings matched other people's expectations and feelings around work. So I found that work of understanding myself as an individual within an organization and as a leader, trying to understand where I wasn't doing as well as I could, where I could be supporting my team better, where I should be doing a better job of collecting feedback, understanding where my blind spots might be. All of that became really key to building a team that grew and succeeded despite a lot of really hard work and despite some challenges and failures along the way. And so, speaking of failures, there are many places that I had to learn very rapidly along the way. And I was just nowhere near as good a manager when I started as when I left Slack. And there was obviously still room for improvement then too. And my experience throughout Slack of things being difficult was that things that were going well would often be overshadowed by the things that were going badly, because it's really hard sometimes to have perspective when you're in the day-to-day. So, for example, without going into too many of the technical details, there was a point a few years ago where we updated the way developers could build apps for Slack, essentially deprecating a former technology. And that meant that we had to ensure that the apps in the directory had upgraded to a newer version. And that resulted in a huge, huge influx of work for my team, work that was not only bigger in volume, but significantly more complex. And so that meant that we went from having review turnaround times that we were extremely proud of to review turnaround times that were just not meeting developers' expectations. They weren't meeting our expectations. We knew what really good could look like, and we weren't meeting that. And in fact, that wasn't the first time that had happened when we were a much smaller team. We also had a spike of influx of volume, and the three of us, with the tools that we had and just being three of us, could not manage that volume. So multiple times of that feeling of being snowed under with work, and work that you could see what good looked like, and you were just not quite getting there. And you'd done it before, and you were just not quite there again. And so I found this experience as a leader where you go on a roller coaster of knowing where you could be, what you can do, and how fast you can move, because organizations like Slack move very, very fast. You know what good looks like, and you have to continually check back in on that vision of what good looks like, and then come back to the reality, which doesn't necessarily meet that expectation, and iterate and iterate and iterate. And as a leader, you have to, or I found I had to balance my way out of what's no longer working. And sometimes that means hiring someone if you can, and sometimes that means improving tooling. But I found that a constant balance of how do you improve as fast as you want, while also balancing the day-to-day work, which can feel like it's piling on and piling on. And sometimes that means taking a deep breath and taking a step back to see things from a different lens. The timelines never seem quite as horrific with some perspective as they do in the moment. But in those situations, I always found it hard when it was my job to support my team as best I could. And it was hard when we were struggling to get to that place of meeting what we knew we could do. And so I often found that was what I needed to do, was keep an eye on that idea of a lighthouse that we were moving towards, a milestone we were moving towards. And I tried to focus on listening to my team and understanding how they were feeling, doing as much as I could to get us as close as possible to that next lighthouse, that next milestone that would help. And because in my opinion, that's what a great leader does, is they define that next lighthouse, and they're continually trying to figure out, how do we get there? What does that lighthouse look like? And how do you support that team when they're doing the rowing of the boat? And while often things felt really hard and complex, the upside of things is that I learned about how you build a really, really strong and resilient team. I genuinely had the most amazing team of people. And it was a huge joy in my career to build a team of people who cared about the work they were doing, who cared about each other. And despite the fact that we were entirely distributed, so we had someone in Australia, I was in the UK, and we had people spread across North America, across all the coasts, And despite the fact that there were members of my team I'd never met in person before, we built this team together of people who were smart and caring and reflective and able to have difficult conversations, share when things weren't working, and able to proactively give input when they saw things that could be improved. And that meant that we had a great culture of running experiments, particularly when things got hard. We get together as a team. We would commiserate first about how hard things felt. And then we'd try and identify one problem that we could make a dent in. What would a 1% improvement be here? What was one thing we could try? Now, we could try an experiment and fail terribly and everything could get worse, but we could also try an experiment and it could make things better. And that meant it was a moment of joint camaraderie with the whole team. Everyone had ownership in what we were trying to do because it was work that was affecting everybody. And so despite the difficulties and the moments of just feeling like you're snowed under, the culture that you create within a team that's able to come together and speak honestly, seek improvements together, despite feeling really stressed possibly, is something that I'm going to treasure forever, and really feels founded in that ability to build good relationships and trust and iterate. You're never going to get exactly where you want to get tomorrow. And in fact, even if you get to that next lighthouse this week, there'll be another lighthouse. When we thought we'd launched a piece of Slack that would be the cherry on top, there was always something new to come along and challenge us to do something new and different and better. And so that was a bit of a whirlwind tour, a lot of information. And so I'd like to give you just a very, very brief overview of some of the things that we'll be looking at in my first session of the Next Steps program. And the focus is going to be on what does it mean to be able to lead an organization that's maybe encountering challenges or growing or trying to figure out what that next step of growth will be. And as leaders, we'll be looking at what it means to place yourself at the edge of your comfort zone constantly in a way that's both productive and healthy for you and your team. Also, how can you engage with the concept of feedback, whether that's given to you explicitly or whether it's given to you in the way that you interact with people around you? And how do you, as a person leading an organization or a founder, how do you look at yourself? How do you reflect and understand what it means for you to have a growth mindset in a space of discomfort to help you become the leader that is needed for that next part of the organization? And so what I would like to do is give you a little taster of some of the kind of exercises we might dive into in the session. Regardless, this should be hopefully an interesting and useful exercise for you all. So if you want to grab a piece of paper or open a Google Doc, we'll have 5 minutes in silence for you all to reflect on these 2 questions. And the questions are, what are 1 or 2 of your current blind spots, maybe as a team member or as a leader in your organization? And how can you collect some data to better understand and improve on those blind spots? If you can't answer the question of what 1 or 2 of your current blind spots might be, I would invite you to consider how you might uncover what those blind spots might be. What are the things that you might not be considering, the things you might be missing, or the things that your team might see in you every day that you're no longer seeing because it's become baked in or habitual. So I'm gonna set a 5-minute timer and let you all reflect in silence, and I will check in at halfway through the time and then again with 30 seconds to go, and hopefully this will give you something to think about. So I'll set the timer now, and please reflect. All right, pencils down, as they used to say in exams. Okay, I hope that that was interesting or useful. Maybe gave you something to think about that you hadn't thought about before. And you can take that away and see how that helps you engage with your team differently. And so now we have time for some questions. As Molly said, you can pop them into the Q&A function in Zoom. If you have any questions either about TechScaler in general, I know that Claire and Molly are there to help, or if you have any questions for me about Slack or what my session will look like in the Next Steps program.
Great, thank you, Amy. So yeah, as Amy just mentioned, you can pop questions into the Q&A function or just in the chat, and we'll be able to pick them up. So the first question I've got in is from Shona. Do you think that Slack's acquisition was a success marker? Did it lead to compromises in the North Star / vision? And what did it help with?
I think that, so Slack's acquisition was at the time the largest amount that had been paid for a SaaS tool. And I think that was a recognition of not only the market share that Slack had gained, but also the potential that it could have and the impact it would have. So yes, I think the acquisition showed that we had significant potential still, and meant that we were doing the right thing, and getting noticed. In terms of compromises in the North Star and vision, from my experience, no. The goal at Slack had always been, and as far as I know is still, to make people's working lives simpler, more pleasant, and more productive. And the teams who run product at Slack are focused entirely on how do you help customers engage with a tool that will help their working lives improve. As someone who is, I will say, entirely biased, Slack allowed me to do my work in a way that I could never have done remotely, completely separate from the rest of my team. And so that North Star vision is still there. In fact, I was just reading that they've launched a new redesign of the product, which is rolling out slowly. And all of that is focused on how do you take the feedback that people are giving about how complex it might be to onboard, or how difficult it might be to stay focused and reduce noise. And they're still working on that kind of mission of how do you help customers work better. And what did it help with? I think simply access to resources. So obviously Salesforce is a force in the world of CRMs and sales tools. And what that has meant is being able to pair Slack with the tools that an entire department of organizations use. So another feature that's launched, I do read other things other than Slack updates, but there's a new page that will allow people who are on sales teams to pull in their sales pipelines into Slack, bring the work that they need to do into the place where getting most of their work done. So I think it gave access to more resources, more tools, and being able to bring things together in a way that Slack might not have been able to do. I will say that it is difficult to integrate a small company or smaller company into a much larger company. Just joining that many people and trying to understand how cultures connect and how teams work together. Two massively different cultures, and I think that is still something that people are exploring and learning. That doesn't happen overnight, but I don't see it compromising that North Star that Slack has to help customers' working lives.
Nice, thank you. Got a question from Robert about the Next Steps program. He says, in the process of building a SaaS product, will TechScaler be running another intake early in 2024? Yeah, so good question. I was going to mention this at the end. We really want to make sure that you are not trying to jump into this too soon for you. We will be having another number of cohorts over the next few years. So when you do get to the stage of needing this program, we will definitely have one coming up for you. So yeah, we say that it's best to do it at a time when you know you can fully commit to it. And sometimes it makes more sense to be focusing on your business rather than being doing this to sort of think about the bigger picture of the business. So yeah, we are planning a second cohort in spring of 24, kind of loosely saying Q2 at the moment. So yeah, thank you for that question. I've got another one in the chat for you, Amy. So Katra has asked, why did you choose startups after Slack?
It's a great question. So despite the fact that when I left, it was not a startup, in my mind and heart, Slack is always going to give me that experience of a startup feeling, of that, just like I said earlier, you don't really know what you're doing and you have to just figure it out and iterate and understand what the next challenge is and how you surmount that. And that is work that I absolutely adore. And the reason I came to coaching is that when I became a new manager and I didn't know what I was doing, I got coaching myself. One of my colleagues was going through her training and she very kindly offered me some coaching sessions. And that helped me so much to become a better manager, a better leader. And I fell in love with coaching. So I started training as a coach. And so now what I'm doing is marrying that love of coaching and helping people reflect and challenge themselves with a love of the challenge and the experience and energy of a startup. What are the puzzle pieces you need to fit together? What does the final picture look like? How do you grow? So startups will always just be a place where I love the energy, I love the challenge, somewhat the chaos, and then being able to marry that reflection time with the chaos.
Wonderful, always with the chaos, right? Polly's got a question. What's your advice for people who are working full-time but also want to start a startup on the side?
Great question. I would say try to go back to fundamentals. So if you don't have a huge amount of time and resources, get really clear about the problem that you are trying to solve and the hypothesis you might have for how you could solve that. So it's not about necessarily coming up with the solution that you think will change the world, but what is the problem you really love, and break that down into a hypothesis. And then as much as possible, try testing that using no code tools where possible. It's amazing what you can build with an Airtable form connected to a Slack workspace, connected to Google Sheets, all sorts of things. So what are you trying to test? And can you get people in the market to validate your assumptions? And that will help you start building a picture of not just what do I think the solution might be, but what do people want and need? And beyond that, even if they don't know what they want and need, what is it that they're looking for? So that data gathering, the hypothesis, and then trying to test with as little outlay of cost and energy as possible. As simple as that. It's a lot of work, I realize, but that's where I would start.
Wonderful, thank you. So there's no more questions that I can see at the moment. When I had was, so you mentioned earlier about picking up jobs that you were used to doing, tasks that you were used to doing, and kind of the moment of letting go and realizing that other people are actually better placed for doing it. Did you notice like a really pivotal moment with when you were sort of like, okay, I need to stop resisting this change, or was it just gradual?
I think, I mean, I will say it happened multiple times throughout my career. There's all these moments of like, I've been holding on to this for too long. I think what helped me get a little bit more comfortable was talking to the people that I was going to delegate the work to. And once I realized that, I was better at doing it a little bit more quickly. So yes, it was gradual. And then also understanding that by giving something away, I'm giving someone else a chance to do that work that they've not done before. And whereas for me, it might feel like, oh, I'm trying to get rid of something. For them, it's that next level of work. And it might not interest them, but it's a challenge. There's a great blog post called I think Giving Away Your Legos by Molly Graham, I believe. And it's fantastic. She talks about how you can build and how you have to give away your Legos to build a successful organization and how to grow yourself. You need to pick up a new set of Legos, and that means giving the others away. So sometimes it happened immediately because I had a new piece of work come along and I just simply did not have the time and I had to shift away other work. Other times it was just more gradual. But what helped me was having conversations with people and saying, is this something that would interest you? Would you like to pick it up? And seeing where there would be development opportunities for other people, even though I felt like I was shirking responsibility in giving it away.
Yeah, I love that article as well. There's been a couple of times where I've just offered a piece of Lego in the way that like people have looked blankly at me. I'm like, oh, okay, sorry, yeah, this is something that I really love, but not everybody knows about. But yeah, I love the terminology of it. We are coming to an end. I might just give people 30 seconds to push through any other final questions they have. Yeah, as I mentioned, our applications are open for Startup Next Steps. You need to be a TechScaler member to apply, or you apply by being a TechScaler member, rather. And so you need to have applied for TechScaler membership by the 21st. And then people will be identified and invited along to enroll. And yes, we will be having Amy along again for our very first session on the 12th of September. And it looks like that is everything for the questions. So yeah, thank you so much for doing this, Amy. It's really wonderful to hear the whole story of Slack. I feel like we could just chat about that and share war stories for hours and hours. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll see you later, everyone.
Bye.